Okay, hello everyone. So today we're going to be focusing on something really exciting, how to improve our nose riding, and more specifically the different sections and cues that the wave can actually give us to let us know that it's time to hit the nose and have the appropriate sections to be nose riding in. So if you're looking to improve upon this, I think it'll be a really valuable video for today. So stay tuned for some epic nose riding and learning how to master this for yourself. And if you are new here, my name's Considine and I'm a longboard enthusiast, competitor, coach, and I'm here to share my learnings and experiences like this one today with you all. So if you do find the video valuable, then please feel free to subscribe, as well as if you know anyone who might find this video valuable as well, feel free to share it with them. But let's get straight into it. Nose riding. It's one of the most difficult things to master as surfers. And like much of what we do, it's very hard to replicate because of the changing nature of the ocean and its waves. That's why knowing what to look for when we're on the wave is so important. So when the opportunity is presented to us, we can strike whilst the iron's hot. So let's start with one of the first and probably one of the most obvious points, but it's still something that I find a lot of us still have trouble with. That being, when we're on the wave and looking for the nose ride, we need to be constantly assessing the sections in front of us. And so our eyes need to be up. Now, the GoPro footage is coincidentally probably a really good example of what it looks like when we aren't looking forwards and assessing the wave, where you can pretty much just, if you're looking at your feet, you can't see what's ahead of you, so you can't see how the wave is changing and what's happening there to make sure that firstly we can get to the nose at the right time, and that also we can hop off the nose, so we're not going to nose dive, we're not going to fall. Now, in this example here, you can see with the paddle into the wave, my eyes are up, and then as I take off, my eyes are also looking down the line. I'm not looking at the board and I'm not looking at my feet, which is really important because again, this closes off a lot of our advantages in terms of seeing what the wave is doing and being ready for positioning, which is what we're going to speak about next. Now, let's actually walk through what we need from a wave to be able to nose ride effectively. For this, there's a framework to help with our thinking about positioning for the nose ride. I like to take a step back and think about what's the perfect wave for a longboard and what's the perfect wave for a nose ride. Much of the time we'll land on an answer like we want an almond-shaped wave where there's the critical part of the wave, so where the wave is breaking, and then it softly tapers onto a nice shoulder. And for our nose riding, of course, we want to be right in the critical part of that pocket. Now, whilst this is correct, I like to add a bit to that to say that for our nose riding, the perfect wave ideally has an extended critical section. So not just where the wave is breaking and then it goes into a soft shoulder, but where the critical part of the wave, it's standing up for a fair few meters down the line. And this can help us to prolong our nose riding, so that's really helpful. But even more importantly, thinking about how we actually get into this critical section, it's really hard to just insert ourselves into the critical section, which is where a lot of the troubles come with our longboarding. So this is something that I like to think about. But we actually want to prepare for the critical section and come from behind that peak. If we imagine that the critical section is behind us and then we just try and stall and then quickly rush to the nose, it's actually a really tough thing to do. So ideally, we're coming from behind. I like to think similar to threading the needle or backdooring a barrel. So you're coming from behind the section, the steeper section is in front of you, which we'll speak a little bit more about soon. And then as you approach that section, you can then step onto the nose so you're in the right place at the right time. Here's a helpful example of this. How often do we hear people say, for our nose rides, we've got to make sure we're in the critical section? Now, this is actually really good advice, and it is what we need. But a lot of the time, this can be misinterpreted to make the positioning, so getting in the critical section, the first step to preparing for our nose rides. And this is where we do run into a few problems in our preparation for our nose rides on the wave too. The natural progression from this advice could be that we position ourselves from the tail into the critical part of the wave. And then once we're already there, that's when we do our 4 steps to the nose. But the problems here is that it's actually quite difficult to cross step, or it's more difficult to cross step when the wave is more critical. And so if we can prepare for this early, we get a lot of benefit. That's why thinking about this in this way, using this sort of framework, can be really transformative. We want to identify early the section ahead of us, not behind us, that we want to be nose riding in. We then want to adjust our position on our board and on the wave so that we're again prepared for the nose ride really, really nicely. And then as we enter that section, we can attack the nose using the threading the needle approach where we come from behind the section. Now, let's run through the hints that the wave is actually giving us so that we can prepare ourselves best for the nose ride. Now, as we spoke about before, and one of the key takeaways from today, it's going to be that we need to make sure that the section that we're going to nose ride in is ahead of us. So we essentially want to see a peak or a crest of the wave that's in front of us, and that's going to be the section that we're trying to navigate our way on the wave for so that we can position ourselves correctly to hit the nose when we get into this section. And if there's not a section like this in front of you, this is why you'll see longboarders constantly weaving back towards the pocket to see if they can draw themselves into a more critical section so that ahead of them is the critical section, not behind them, because it's, again, a lot harder, and it can be done, but it's a lot harder to stall and then position yourself correctly for the nose ride. So I almost like to think of this like when I'm looking at the wave in front of me, like there's another takeoff section that I can see in front of me, and that's where I'm going to be positioning for. Of course, we don't want this critical section or this crest of the wave in front of us to be closing out, so it needs to look like, similar to what we used as the example of the ideal longboard wave that we used before, where you've got that critical section, that peak where it tapers off softly into a shoulder. That's sort of what we're looking for, but in front of us. Now, this will change depending on the wave that you're on, but as a general rule of thumb, we want to be seeing this section in front of us early so that we can prepare early. If we can see it 8 to 10 seconds before we actually hit that section, that's going to be ideal because we can position ourselves properly. So let's step through that process of what this would look like to prepare ourselves for that section, for the nose ride before we get there. In terms of our positioning on the board, I really like to use 2 cross steps to the middle of the board. Now, I know oftentimes we might think of cross-stepping as a continuous action until we get to the nose. So 4 steps to the nose, not discontinued, so all going at once. But I like to use the first 2 steps as a really good way to center ourselves in a really balanced part of the board. And then we can also consider whether, when we're looking forwards, it's the right section for a nose ride. So are we going to take those next 2 steps once we hit that section? Or do we need to negotiate our position on the wave a little bit differently and come back to the tail to do that? So I like to use the first 2 steps as a reset method, consider our options, and it's also a great balanced place to be. The other advantage of this, of course, is this now we're only 2 steps away from the nose. So rather than hitting that critical section, being on the tail and needing to do 4 quick cross steps to the nose in a more critical section, we can do 2 easy steps. In terms of our position on the wave, of course, for the most part, there will be some scenarios where this differs, but we want to be nice and high in the top third of the wave. Once we hit that critical section and you start to see the wave bottoming out a little bit and it becoming quite steep, that's when we can hit the nose. And as the wave steepens out as well and we're at the top of the wave, we're going to have that nice lift underneath our nose, which is the best feeling ever. So that's definitely what we're after, and that's the approach that we want to use. So I wanted to keep this nice and quick, nice and short. Not sure how long this video will end up being, but I think it's a short one. But essentially, let's recap what we need to be doing and bring it all together. We want to make sure that the eyes are up so that we can actually assess and observe what the wave is doing. And then we want to make sure that we're preparing for the section that we're going to nose ride in, coming from behind the section and threading the needle. So we're going to be coming from behind and then as it steepens up, we can then access that critical section by going to the nose at that point as well. It's much harder if we're trying to stall ourselves before we cross step to the nose to then get to the critical section behind us. And I often find that this is one of the key things that maybe holds us back a little bit when we're trying to learn to nose ride. So I hope that's really, really useful. If there is anything else that you would like to see on this channel at all, please leave that in the comments below, as well as if there's anything that I missed today that you would like to have touched on in future edits, or even just as a little discussion that we can have in the comment section as well. Please leave those below too. Other than that, I hope you guys are getting waves, and we'll catch you on the next one.